Just like eating an Oreo, sometimes it's best to start in the middle.
I think the best way to tell the story is by starting at the end, briefly, then going back to the beginning, and then periodically returning to the end, maybe giving different characters perspectives throughout. Just to give it a bit of dynamism, otherwise it's just sort of a linear story.
Starting in the middle of a story and then flashing back is a powerful tool for a film. However, sometimes studios just use it to cut to the action. Case in point.
Oh, crap!
The film adaptation of Uncharted has taken over 10 years to finally release, and yet the result of all this work and revision seems like a film that's very rushed. Most likely the result of late-stage editing, the movie opens with Tom Holland's video game hero dangling out of the back of a flying cargo plane. It's in all the trailers and is a not exact recreation of a sequence from the third game. The dance moves may seem the same, but the location, reason, and participants are different. The film then flashes back to a more appropriate start of the story, with a much younger Nathan and his older brother Sam stealing a map. After seeing Uncharted, I know the plane scene doesn't really represent an emotional turning point for the main character. It really only seems to exist to promise the audience, hey, don't worry, there's this really cool action sequence in the midpoint if you don't drift off to TikTok before the second act. Similar films of low quality have also opened this way, and it always betrays a lack of trust in both the narrative and the audience. It's like the film producers are Columbo, assuring the audience as Fred Savage that there are giants and sword fights past all the kissing. However, this technique isn't always used badly. It's an important narrative technique known as in medias res, or simply in the middle of the narrative. This is in no way a technique exclusive to middle-of-the-road action vehicles. One of the more famous uses is in the opening of Fight Club.
Would you like to say a few words to mark the occasion?
I can't think of anything.
This David Fincher classic opens with the protagonist being held hostage by walking cultural metaphor Tyler Durden. As an intro into the story, it presents a lead character at a massive turning point in his journey. He is potentially at the end of his life, as a seemingly deranged man holds a gun in his mouth. It raises questions. Who is the narrator? Why is he being held at gunpoint? Who is Tyler Durden? It allows the film to be framed as a retelling by an unreliable narrator, giving the famous twist a sense of logic when we look back on the details. When the story eventually returns to this moment, we now have the answers to all those questions.
I'm sorry.
I still can't think of anything.
We have a full understanding of these characters and how they arrived at this point. Fight Club's opening shares a similar function as the recent Ridley Scott film, The Last Duel. The historical drama opens with the duel, where it's made very clear that these two men want nothing more than to kill each other. This knowledge hangs like a sword of Damocles over the rest of the film. Central characters played by Matt Damon and Adam Driver are friends when the movie moves backwards in the timeline. Driver's squire even saves Damon's life in the opening battle. Knowing where these two end up gives each interaction between them an extra layer of tension and meaning. Which moment will drive these two to such a frenzied rage? Is it even truly one action, or just a culmination in a series of perceived insults to each man's honor? This is the true strength of in medias res, and why it can be used to such effectiveness. The key is to choose which moment you want to drop your audience into. Imagine Raiders of the Lost Ark opening not with the now iconic temple run, but at the moment the Ark is opened. Ghosts swirl, Nazi heads explode, and just before it's revealed whether or not Indy and Marion survived, the film cuts to a 3 weeks earlier card, and now Indy is teaching his class full of horny students. One could be forgiven for thinking that this is an incredibly effective opening. The Ark sequence is possibly the film's most memorable moment, and by cutting before Indy and Marion's survival, you keep the tension of the scene later on. Plus, you can get people through all that boring classroom stuff.
All right, let's get back to this site. Turkneen Barrow near Hazleton.
But the problem is it betrays the core tension of the movie. Will Indy get to the Ark before the Nazis? Is the Ark truly supernatural or just an artifact? What's the Nazis' plan anyway? In our new version of the movie, all these questions are answered within the first 10 minutes. The Nazis do get the Ark, it is in fact supernatural, and their plan was to open it while wearing this outfit. The tension and weight of Indy's race against the scum of humanity is entirely lost if you open the film this way. it's a less good film. Let's go over one final great example of in medias res. And I think this one will be the most illustrative. Helpfully, it features Nathan Drake, which is great for the symmetry of this video.
Hey, jackass, you're ruining the show here.
Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, like the title suggests, is the second game in the Uncharted series. After the obligatory fancy quote, the game opens with hero Nathan Drake waking from unconsciousness in much the same way as Holland in the film. Almost like the movie ripped it off. The perspective shifts, and Nathan is in a derailed train dangling over a cliff. He falls, and the player is given control, forced to make Nathan climb up the train, avoiding falling debris and broken pipes. Once you get to the top, Drake passes out again, and the story moves back to Nate agreeing to steal an object from a museum in Istanbul. Matters become further complicated when it turns out one of his old partners is an ex-flame. This is where we see another large difference between the film and the game. The game keeps going back to the train crash. We can now see that Drake is badly injured, having been shot. He is not dressed for the searing cold weather he now finds himself marooned in, and worst yet, he is all alone against heavily armed soldiers. This is Drake's lowest point, and when the story eventually cycles back to this moment, we truly know how low it is. Nate's been betrayed by both the man he thought of as a friend and by his old flame. He's been shot by Harry, his former partner, and he's been forced to leave behind both Sully and Elena, the two people he trusts the most. The opening of the game raises the same questions that the film does. Who is Nate fighting? How did he get here? Will he survive? The key difference is the emotion of the situation. Among Thieves gives you the time to really soak in the peril and the stakes. Drake is hurt, scared, and alone. In the film, it's hyper fast and over in 5 minutes. There's no real time to absorb the peril of the situation. It's just an explosion of action and then a long stretch before a fight breaks out.
Just to give it a bit of dynamism, otherwise it's just sort of a linear story.
Just tell us what happened.
Uncharted invites its own parallels to Indiana Jones, but it didn't really learn from that series' example. Each indie film begins with its own set piece that propels the audience into the story, creating that burst of excitement that gets us through the boring bits. Perhaps it was the budget or pandemic restrictions that forced the studio to avoid any more action set pieces than necessary. Tom Holland himself all but admits this to Jacksepticeye when talking about wanting to include the fourth game's famous chase sequence. Choosing an in medias res opening can also prove economical. 2 action set pieces for the price of 1. Uncharted's editing issues aside, in medias res is a great scalpel that's often wielded like a club. It's seen its most effective uses in classic and neo-film noir. Sunset Boulevard tells us in no uncertain terms that the events we're about to see unfold lead to the narrator's death. Raging Bull first shows us a former champion, now out of shape and practicing bad comedy, telling us up front that glory is fleeting.
Wait, this isn't right! Well, it's too late now! No, I mean, we did this already! What do you mean?
The true point of in medias res is context and suspense. Like Hitchcock's Table Bomb, it provides the audience with crucial information the characters do not have. This character will die. These friends will become enemies. Our hero will find himself at his lowest point. If you remove these openings, it does more than just deprive the audience of an excitement boost to get them through the talky bits. For the examples I gave, it would cause irrevocable harms to the themes, story, and characters in the film. It removes the biggest question dangling over every scene following it. That question is, how did we get here? So when you see Uncharted, or any movie that starts in medias res, ask yourself, do I really wonder how we ended up here?